I want to move on, and I'm really thrilled to have Lieutenant General Chris Miller joining us again, retired, teaches future of warfare, et cetera, at the Space Academy, at the Air Force Academy. Great to have you in, sir. Appreciate all your support, and I'm really looking forward to your conversation with Bob Smith. This is going to be great.
Well, thank you, David. Your reference to Space Academy is a Freudian slip because the Air Force Academy is, in fact, the nation's Space Academy, Space Force Academy, and proud to be that. But I am very happy to be given the honor of talking with Bob Smith, the CEO of Blue Origin. Really looking forward to the conversation. Bob, can you hear me okay?
I can. Sorry about me.
Great.
Good.
Well, for those who don't know you, you're a man who needs no introduction, but I'm impressed by two things that kind of brought you to where you are now. You've got aerospace engineering, mathematics, and business degrees from 4 different universities scattered all over the country: Texas A&M, Brown University, University of Texas, and MIT. And you have had a career of technology and engineering and human team leadership at some pretty noteworthy places: United Space Alliance, Aerospace Corporation, Honeywell Aerospace, and now, of course, at Blue Origin. So it's a real honor to have you speak to the group. It's been a good day so far. Very, very interesting discussions all day, and thanks, David, for your leadership of getting this going. Bob, I wonder if just kind of to warm things up, lots of people know about Blue Shepard and what you've been doing there, but maybe a few minutes on your task list, the things you're working on, the things that aren't quite as visible to even the knowing audience.
Yeah, it's a long task list, but first of all, thank you and David Miller for inviting us to talk here today. It is an incredibly exciting time in the entire industry to actually be talking about space. I've never been in a situation where space has been as exciting as it is, and I like to call it a second golden age of spaceflight, because there's never been more capital invested, more companies being developed, more space systems out there, launches at an unprecedented level. And you've had the establishment of the Space Force, as well as NASA saying, we're going to go back to the moon with Americans again after over 50 years, which is just a remarkable place for us to be in. So it's never been a more exciting time to be in the industry. Relative to Blue Origin, it's also very exciting. We're not only developing incredible systems, but growing at an incredible pace. We've been a relatively small company for the majority of our time. We've been when I joined a little bit over 4 years ago, we were 800 people. We're now over 6,000 people with locations across the country and continue to expand. But it's been really exciting over the past even just year to actually see what we've been able to use all that momentum from the prior years to actually culminate in some amazing results. Last year, we actually flew for the first time human spaceflight on coming up on our 1-year anniversary from that, 720. We did that on the Apollo anniversary, obviously, but we flew 4 astronauts on that day, and since that time have had 5 crewed flights, now flying 25 people in less than a year. So we've actually increased the number of astronauts by quite a bit. When you think about the population of total astronauts in the history, is around about 600 people. That's a pretty good percentage already, and we're just getting started. We'll have another flight here in August, and keep that going, as well as continuing to expand the cadence, as well as figure out how do we make New Shepard more affordable and actually fly it on a regular basis. I always like to remind people that New Shepard is doing kind of the graduate course so that the next set of courses are even easier. So when you fly human people into space and you go often, you can figure out how to make routine space flight. When you do humans into space, it's absolutely the highest level of security and mission assurance. So when we go on to fly New Glenn, which is what we're now working on as well, we'll have that assurance and that basic knowledge that we've developed over that time. To do that, you have to build reusable engines, make tanks, be able to try and flight controllers, all of those things we're learning at scale on New Shepard. So now that we built LC-36 in Florida, the first new pad in Florida, which was an amazing accomplishment by itself to produce one in Florida. That pad is now active. And we're building flight hardware for New Glenn, our orbital vehicle, which we hope to fly soon. But you don't get to fly that without having engines. And so our BE-4 engines are now on the test stand, our first two engines that we will deliver, flight engines to United Launch Alliance, our great NASA security partner, that I'm excited to get them off of Russian engines based on the conversation we just had. They will not be flying on Russian engines very, very soon because they'll be flying on Blue Origin BE-4 engines, which will be great. But that's not the small part of our ambition. Our ambition is to go much further than that because we also want to go back to the moon. And we also want to make sure that we have a continuous presence in North orbit with our orbital reef. So as you can see, that task list continues to be growing, but it's all in service of the three missions that we have for Blue Origin, which is one, to lower the cost of access to space, two, make sure that you use space resources, and then three, inspire another generation, because all of this is being done so that we can actually make sure that we have humanity going out into space to use energy and resources for the benefit of Earth so that we don't harm this Blue Origin that we have called Earth. I think a lot of people forget that, and those three missions that we have stated for everybody in the company tie to New Shepard, our engine program, New Glenn, all the way through the things we're doing in space. Yeah. A lot of stuff. Big task.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I want to come back in just a minute to the challenges that you faced as a CEO in scaling the company as rapidly as you have. One thing that came to mind as you were talking about the engine technology and the new pad is, you know, the design philosophy that you have promulgated throughout the company that your teams use. What are some of the toughest technical challenges you faced, and is there a particular way that you like to go about solving them, or are you just sort of blocking and tackling? What's your philosophy for dealing with the kinds of tough problems that you have?
There's two problems that we solve, and one is what I would just call the scaling of the company. So if you think about Blue Origin as fundamentally as a startup, which it was until very recently as a research development company, and scaling up into a business, that takes a whole different set of skills. So making sure that you understand how do you do government contracting, how do you actually have the proper HR systems and finance systems, et cetera, as well as then hiring the best talent you can. And then also getting manufacturing up to rate. Those by themselves are hard challenges for any company. When you add those with the technical challenges that we have, you actually start to see the issues that we're facing. On the technical side, I think the biggest areas that we think about and the really fundamental problem that we're trying to solve is how do you make true reuse? It is a strange thing when you talk to rocket propulsion experts who are used to throwing away engine and say, wait a minute, what is your logistics and sparing program when you get that engine back? What is your lifing conditions? How do you make sure that you understand your seals, your soft goods, those things? So that reusability idea has to promulgate through the entire design and development, as well as what you think about in turn times for a vehicle. So you start thinking about aircraft-like analogs to provide to the team, and that's often hard for a team that actually hasn't thought about it in that way. The second thing I would say that's also important is that this idea of failing fast, you have to break some of the, what I'd say, traditional aerospace practices to really do that and do that well. I was trained always in my career to go through a very gated process of PDR and CDR, and you didn't release your long lead hardware items and other things until you went through a series of gates. But that's based on an acquisition approach. That's not based on what's best and fastest for developing that piece of technology. You want to actually develop manufacturing and the design concurrently so that you're learning how to manufacture. And every time you have a test stand that's empty, that's an opportunity missed. And so learning quickly and actually making sure the team's moving at the speed of need, not necessarily the speed that is actually laid out in terms of this stair-step type of approach of development, has been a hard thing for us to continue to learn. But we're learning it, and we're learning it quickly.
Yeah, that makes great sense, and it just seems to fit with the philosophy that you've already articulated of trying to get to reuse and trying to push that envelope. So, thank you for that lay down. If I go back to the human side of the business, not only have you had to change processes and build processes to scale, but I'm interested in your views on talent management, how you've found the environment that you've been building in, and then importantly, from talking with John Hyten earlier about Club for the Future and some of the long-term things you're really looking at, how do you see the long-term sustainment of your workforce evolving?
Well, first and foremost, I think one of the things that we're benefiting from is that for a long period of my career, I'll just put it that way, we did not make space exciting. We went through a long period of time when space was actually kind of boring. And that's amazing that we were able to do that. But I think we're past that now. Now I think everybody understands the centrality of space, the excitement in space. And so when we hire, we think about one thing fundamentally for everybody that comes to Blue Origin. And we actually talk about how do we hire truly missionaries and not mercenaries. You don't come to Blue Origin and think about anything other than this passion of actually building things to live and work in space, to actually expanding humanity's footprint into space for the benefit of the Earth. If they don't centrally have that idea and that belief, then they're just not going to put in the work and the challenges and everything else that comes into going and building these magnificent hard systems. It's a heavy lift each and every day. So we screen heavily for that. But beyond that, then when you have this exciting mission and this exciting set of systems that you're trying to develop, people that want those challenges find you. So it's not as much of a search process than anything else. But I think then once you have the people inside, I think the harder problem is then to make sure that they're all organized well and actually culturally aligned. And so what I think one of our bigger challenges is making sure that we're giving all the tools that we need for our middle management and lower management as they scale this company. And then also making sure they have the tools to make sure that we have a really diverse, inclusive workforce that is really well suited for the kind of values that we want to profess. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about is how do we have these, what we call our blue leadership principles, much like Amazon has their leadership principles. And we make sure everybody knows those and we talk about them. How do you have a bias for action? How do you have a focus on results? How do you embrace Team Blue? Those are just a few of them. But some of that gets down to how do you make sure that you have an empathetic and a good workforce that makes sure that you attract and retain the best workforce. And I think that's also gets into how do you get a very diverse and inclusive workforce. But pivoting to your discussion on Club for the Future, I would say that it's fundamental to what we do. I mentioned our three missions: lowering the cost of access to space, living and working in space, and using space resources, and then finally inspiring a next generation. Because if you want this great vision that we have to actually come to pass, it's a multi-generational one. And that's the hard thing for people to get their head around. Our generation's responsibility is actually to build the road to space, to make space accessible, to make sure that so you lower the barrier entry so that everybody can go to space. Well, you want to make sure that when you do that, you have a next generation there. So that's why we founded Club for the Future, and make sure that everybody in Blue Origin on Team Blue has it as part of their mission when they come to work every day. It says, you have to inspire the next generation because this work has to go on beyond your career.
Yeah. That raises a question. To what extent do you think of Club Blue as a tool for inspiration but sort of in complement to a tool for actually educating and informing those who have to educate and inform and really substantively prepare young people who are going to have to understand the subjects that you and your colleagues do?
I think Club's fundamental mission is one to make sure that we have another generation of STEM professionals that are excited about what the future holds. And we do that through a lot of different mechanisms. One that we talk a lot about is how do you make space tangible and accessible and not this far-flung thing. And we do that through a simple thing where you can go to Club of the Future's website or print one out yourself and send us a postcard. And we'll fly that postcard into space, we'll stamp it and return it. When you can actually have something you hold in your hand that has flown into space and you're a kid of 9 years old, that's magical. I mean, that's an amazing thing that you can hold up. But we also allow people to fly small payloads on board. So we've actually made the price of payload flights for suborbital experimentation also very cheap. So we've been able to fly high school experiments and very inexpensive college experiments to do that. So making space accessible is one thing that we do. The other thing is that we actually do work on standards aligned and space-based curriculum for K through 12, and we make sure we provide that to each of the schools that we look for to actually partner with. And then we also have a partnership process by which we actually work with others. You may have remembered that on our first flight for New Shepard, we actually had an auction, and that auction generated $28 million. And the reason why we had the auction was so that we could actually fund a lot of our partners. So we've selected 19 different charities that were aligned with what we're trying to do with Club for the Future and gave them each $1 million. So those partners can reach out in a lot of different places, and particularly to underserved and underrepresented communities that they already have those programs and already have that capability for people to see themselves in the future being in space. And so that's how we've actually organized Club for the Future to excite another generation.
That is exciting, and I got to tell you, as a kid who used to be fascinated by space launch but never had a postcard go up, you may get a postcard from me.
Send us one. We'd love to.
I will do that. Let me pivot briefly to some more serious and probably less enjoyable things. You've been in and around commercial and national security space for a long time, and one of the challenges that's very obvious in the future is space is both exciting and has great potential, but it is also increasingly something that the world depends on. So from a Blue Origin perspective, what do you see as both concerns or potential good trends in national security space and commercial space exploration and exploitation?
Well, I think, first of all, the thing that you just said, I think, is something that I think we haven't reacted to well as a country. And I think I'm very excited that we are now recognizing that space is a contested domain. I think a lot of us in the industry have been very much, standing on the table and saying this is a huge problem for us. And I think we, as a country, have underreacted to that. And I'm excited now that with the establishment of Space Force, great leaders like General Hyten, General Raymond, who have also been advocating for this, that everybody's going, okay, our reliance on space is just so central to our economy, our way of life, our defense posture, et cetera, that everybody understands that that is a huge problem for us that we have to go address. Secondly, I'd say that we're starting to get the idea that really we need doctrine and policy that goes into how do we actually have a place where we understand what the proportional response is when actually we have a threat in space. When our GPS is jammed locally, what is our response? How do we think about that in terms of national policy and plans and doctrine? And we're going to train against that in a way that we've never trained before. So I think establishing that to a much greater extent is fantastic. But then I think the final point that I'd say that it's very useful is that space systems and access is changing just dramatically. As I mentioned earlier, there's just a proliferation of space systems, whether we're talking about lower constellations that we're seeing, or what we're seeing from launch providers. I mean, there are dozens of launch providers that didn't exist before. And you're starting to see that in Ukraine. I think one of the things that Ukraine will be known for, this conflict will be known for, was the first use of really commercial intelligence that could be provided, that was actually used as a tool both of diplomatically as well as militarily in a way that you couldn't do because of protecting sources and methods. So I think that's a big aspect of that. And then finally, to launch, we're in a period in which it used to be dominated by basically state actors. It's no longer dominated by space actors. It's 75 to 80% commercial and civil and international. And that use of actual military assets for launch is actually becoming a smaller and smaller fraction. As a matter of fact, I'm actually concerned in the period of 24, 25, 26 that we're actually going to have a supply shortage. We're going to have more demand, and that's a great place to be, but it's one that we have to make sure that we've actually structured our acquisition approach for national security launch to make sure that it actually can access and actually grow the capacity of the industry to a way that it hasn't done before.
Yeah, that raises a question in my mind. And we've kind of covered the waterfront in today's discussion, and I know that there's more to come, but from that perspective you just articulated, are there gaps that either the United States or spacefaring nations in general, those who are kind of like-minded, are there things that we are not working on as hard as you think we need to be? Not necessarily things that Blue Origin is focused on, but just more broadly.
Yeah, I think one of the things, since we're honoring General Hyten, I think one of the things that he's absolutely advocated for his entirety of his career, as far as I can tell, has been fixing the acquisition process. And I think there is real progress to be made. I think now that you have what I'll just call proof points that exist that say, wait a minute, no, I can make high reliability software that, oh, by the way, I use everywhere else, and I don't have to follow a DoD 5000 series acquisition process to develop software. I can make great high integrity software without doing those types of sets. I can have good mission assurance without having to go through all the things that we did back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. That can fundamentally change. And if we change that, we can deploy systems. I think that's the thing that I think with the recognition of near-peer threats, I think with the recognition that you don't have to have a bespoke system, bespoke DoD-derived requirement system to actually have an effective system in space or in launch. I think all of those things are improving the overall acquisition approach, but having the ability to delegate authority down, move faster, work towards high-level requirements and leverage commercial wherever you can, and only develop bespoke systems when they're absolutely necessary. Like if you need an aircraft carrier, you're not going to find a commercial alternate, right? That's just not going to happen. But if I need a satellite bus or I need a launch of almost any class, you can get that commercially and get it with high reliability and good mission assurance.
Yeah, and I think this really kind of underlines your point that the way you get experience in space and get better at space is by getting experience in space.
Exactly.
And if you do that, you can't take decades to study it and then decades to test it. And
Agreed. I'll just expand on that point if I could, which is I think one of the things that we benefited from, if you look at the history of the aerospace industry, the reason why the Apollo age was so good, and a lot of the systems that were developed in the 60s, 70s, and the beginning of the 80s were done so well and so quickly and so effectively, and we took great strides in that era, is that you were leveraging a lot of the experience that happened from World War II and the Korean era, where you had a large aerospace industry that was getting lots of iterations. They were getting lots of practice. They developed scar tissue over that period, and they learned. And a lot of what you learn when you're developing space systems is you learn by doing. And you have to have those things because you'll go back and go, oh, I remember that when I saw that in test. I need to fix that in design on my next iteration.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I know we're getting close to having to wrap up, and so I want to shift real quick to just sort of big picture philosophy. You've been in business for a long time. If you had one or two lessons learned, things that you would really like to pass on to folks who want to follow in your footsteps or parallel your footsteps, what would those things be?
Well, I think a couple things that come to mind are one, just learn all the time. I think one thing that people represent in their careers is that if you're a knowledge worker, that's what you're selling. I mean, that's what you're personally selling. And for those that are controls engineers out there, I always like talk about you're a transfer function. You take down information and you somehow amplify it or improve it somehow. And if you're not continuously learning throughout your career, whether that's in business or engineering or manufacturing or organizational dynamics, psychology, empathy, all of these things, you have to go learn. And so be a continuous learner, I think, is one of the first things that I say. I think the second thing that that I tell a lot of people is, getting results speaks for itself. Once you actually can be known for getting things done on a regular basis, and if you say something, you're going to get it done. That's a big calling card that you may have. And then the third thing I generally say is you have to have fun. You have to enjoy your work. You spend too much time doing what you do to actually not have fun. It's a large percentage of your life. Enjoy it. And particularly if you're doing something as hard as putting people into space, that's a hard job. It comes with a lot of hours. And if you don't really, really enjoy it, you should not do it. But hopefully you find those things that really inspire you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. It's pretty obvious to me that you have fun doing what you do.
I do.
And I'm guessing that the people who work for you benefit from that and have fun too. So best of luck in all you're doing, and thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it very much. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Right, bye-bye.
Okay. Back over to you, David.
Thank you, sir. That was wonderful. Thank Bob. And I just want to point out this picture behind me. This is Bob with the good General Hyten, and really excited that General Hyten has joined Blue Origin and running their Club of the Future, inspiring people for the future to enter the space field. And so that's really wonderful.